This episode of Greenhouse Grower to Grower is brought to you by Profile Growing Solutions. Unlock your growth potential with Profile Growing Solutions. A revolutionary product portfolio is the key to cultivating total performance for professional growers in today's horticultural and food production markets. Profile supplies industry-leading substrates and nutrition products, such as hydrofiber engineered media, Florican controlled release fertilizers, and True Root propagation solutions. These products provide consistent quality and superior performance to boost plant growth and return on investment. Learn more at profilegrowing.com. Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. There's probably no one more knowledgeable on the ins and outs of biological products and how they work in the greenhouse than Suzanne Wainwright-Evans, also known as the Buglady. Suzanne has offered her insights and advice at several industry conferences and workshops, and she's also written articles for trade publications such as Greenhouse Grower. She provides hands-on training for growers as well as garden retailers, and she does it all through her business, Buglady Consulting, which she started 25 years ago. In my recent conversation with Suzanne, I was fortunate to learn even more, including how her obsession with insects began when she was in middle school, why there's still a lot the industry needs to learn when it comes to biocontrols, and how failure can often lead to innovation. Here's our conversation. So I want to start the conversation today talking about your background in biologicals and crop protection and how that has led into your current role today within the industry.
Well, I was very fortunate that when I was in middle school, I pretty much decided then I wanted to work with insects. I remember very clearly as a child climbing a tree and finding some bark lice on the tree and not knowing what they were at the time and becoming completely just fascinated with them. I feel like it kind of like altered my brain. And so I just became obsessed with insects and almost anything creepy crawly. If you talk to my mom, she'll tell you about finding worms in my pants pockets and things like that. Then when I got into high school, um, I had an ecology teacher named Lynn Sweetay, and she had a club outside of school called Save What's Left,
Okay.
and it was an environmental club where what we do on the weekends, at the time, because this was the '80s, Florida was just really getting developed, and we'd go to these big areas of native ecology that were gonna get basically bulldozed for housing developments, and
Got
we would go in and we'd remove native orchids and other native plants. We removed, tortoises, which actually some of them are still living, like, in Palm Beach, and we'd try to save what native ecology we could for moving it around, and, of course, this was done with guidance of ecologists. It wasn't a bunch of kids just going in and doing this,
Yeah.
and it really made me start to think more about the ecology and the impacts humans were having, and then I started to understand about the sugarcane's impact on Florida's ecology with the fertilizers and the pesticides. So I kinda decided then that I wanted to find a career path that allowed me to work in nature, but at the same time make a difference.
Yeah.
Um, and unfortunately, I wasn't so academically inclined, because I had applied to the University of Florida, and they actually kinda laughed at me thinking I could actually get in.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Okay.
yeah. So, as my mom would say, it's that I just didn't learn in the traditional ways. So I
Yeah.
actually started at community college, and the first 2 classes I registered for at Broward Community College was entomology was number 1 and botany was number 2. And I just absolutely loved it. I'm not gonna lie, botany was probably not the smartest choice right out of high school to take because botany was really hard. I should have taken, like, a horticulture course.
Okay.
But, I took all those science classes there,
Yeah.
and eventually, got my associate's degree, then transferred into the University of Florida.
Right.
And again, learning more about Florida natives, Florida ecology, environmental impact of agriculture. Um it really made me push more in the direction of wanting to make a difference. At the time, in school, and they did not teach this to you, that there was this starting industry of companies rearing beneficials and selling them. But I was taking a class, and there was a guy in there named Jake Socherman, and Jake Socherman at the time was working for Florican, which is a large fertilizer company,
Yeah.
but at the time, Ed Rosenthal, who owned it, had this vision of having a more sustainable a company with more sustainable environmental products, and that's why they were doing the NutriCoat, because of controlling nutrient runoff. They, were also working with, at the time, BioLine, which was a UK-based company that produced beneficials, which at the time nobody had really heard of. Well, Jake met me, went back, told Ed, he's like, "I met this girl in school, blah, 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 blah." And they contacted me, and they actually hired me before I graduated, waiting for me to graduate so that I would step right in to working with beneficials.
Oh, wow,
And
great.
so, like, a week after I graduated college, I was working for Florican. Honestly, I don't wanna say I was in over my head because I was ready for a challenge, but, this was still the days of basically dial-up internet. There weren't university people working on this, very
Yeah.
limited information. But Dan Kahn, who, uh ran the insectary, in California for Bioline, he really helped me, gave me a lot of information, and then I just went out and started working with growers. A lot of it was trial and error. I'd come in and scout, and if they bought the beneficials, I would release them, and I would teach them how to do it, and so that's how I kind of really learned hands on the ground, about biological control, and had to kind of figure it out in Florida. And back then, we only had a handful of beneficials. The limited compatibility information on pesticides came in a paper book once a year. Um, and it was out of Europe, so there wasn't even a lot of the US products. So, I just had to figure out a lot as I went,
Sure.
on my way.
Okay. All right. Um, so how did that then lead to, I'm not sure when you started Buglady Consulting, but how did that kind of evolve to this point then?
So this year, I will have had Buglady Consulting 25 years.
Okay.
My husband says it's 26 according to the paperwork. I feel like it's 25. So, we're going with 25.
Yeah.
'Cause, but so I had worked at Florican,
Yeah.
and, I will just say that the job was great, but it was a bit of a challenging work environment,
Mm.
and I decided I needed to move on.
Okay.
Um, and I had a non-compete, so I was limited in what I can do. So I actually started working for a plant broker.
Okay.
But Florican still wanted to move forward with biocontrol, so we made an agreement that um Florican would pay my consulting fee to go back and work with growers, and my new employer was okay with that if, every couple weeks I needed to take a day or so and go help the growers.
Yeah.
So that's kind of it started very lightly there doing consulting, and then I was at the SNA show, which used to be huge in Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where I met my now husband at the show, and we dated long distance, for 2 years, and then, we got married, and then I moved up north, and I was trying to find a job. I applied at extension positions, I applied at greenhouses, I applied at, horticultural supply companies,
Yeah.
and since I was, like, the biocontrol person, nobody would hire me, because I was told that was not the future, that
Oh,
was just a
wow.
trend. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and it was amazing, just how not nice people were about my career path,
Yeah.
because thinking that this was just, a trend, this isn't a legit thing. Um, then, the owner of Delray Plants called me because I had worked with them, and they're down in Venus, Florida, and Randy's like, "Hey, we really wanna keep moving with this bio stuff, but we don't have anybody here in Florida to help us." I'm like, "Well, I'm just sitting up here in Pennsylvania teaching horseback riding and doing nothing." And
Sure.
he's like, "Come on down, we'll pay you to come down." I'm like, "Okay." So, Randy kind of jump started me into this traveling consulting thing,
Yeah.
and then, other farms were like, "Wait, you're coming down and helping them. Well, why don't you come help me?" And then it absolutely snowballed after that. And, again, here I am now 25 years later, and I never dreamed I would be doing this long. I never dreamed that it would all happen this way, but it's worked out really well for me. And I'm very grateful to the industry, the growers, for all the support.
Sure. So, I mean, I know you were talking there. So when you first got into it, this was a relatively unheard of field, which obviously a lot has changed since that process. It is funny though. I do look at the surveys that we do through greenhouse growers sometimes, and while the number of growers who are using or looking to use bios is growing, it's still not at a really high level. So I wonder, what do you think needs to happen to continue to increase those numbers? Is it just more people becoming aware, or what can we do as an industry to continue to boost that?
I think all the growers are aware of it.
Yeah.
They've been to enough meetings. They know what's going on. I still think, it's the educational part.
Mm,
Um, that I mean, I would love to say that you need just as amount of education to use pesticides, and in theory, you should have more education to use pesticides because of the potential consequences of misusing pesticides.
yeah.
Um, but I do think still a lot of people with pesticides subscribe to the spray and pray and just hope it works
Mm,
without doing the due diligence to make sure they are selecting the absolute right product. But I do think that, bios are still kind of this unknown in
yeah.
a way, and that stronger education is needed, and it needs to be beyond these, "Here's a 45-minute talk, get a pesticide credit on beneficial kind of thing" talks.
Yeah.
We really need these deeper dives. We also need growers to have more access to help, like with identification, and unfortunately, with extension being cut down and cut down and cut down in states losing extension,
Yeah.
growers actually have less access now to get help with identification to species because we that is really important with biocontrol. You have to know what you're dealing with, and it's kinda true with pesticides too, but again, people are just kinda guessing and hope the product works on the species they have.
Right.
So I think that there's this barrier of taking the time to learn these things, and I'm gonna tell you, insect ID is not easy. It
Mm,
is work, and so the growers don't always have to learn it themselves, but they just have to have somebody that can do it for them, and unfortunately, a lot of people just, like, matchy-match pictures online,
yeah.
and you can't necessarily do that because a lot of the, photos online are inaccurate. Also, when you get into thrips, you actually have to look at, like, the directions and locations of hairs on the back of their neck,
Yeah.
and so you do have to know these things, in order to run the programs. At the same time, there are people that just throw out a bunch of different beneficials, throw some generalists in there, and they're not, dialing down their program to make it as least expensive as possible, but they're just going with, "I don't have the time to figure all this stuff out. I'm just throwing it out, and if it works, and it's in my budget, great." So there is that approach too,
Yeah.
but I think, number 1, we need more in-depth education on it, and you need more time, and I will say I'm grateful to shows like Cultivate, where now they are giving me, like, 3-hour sessions where we could do this much deeper dive
Right.
into this detailed stuff. I also think we need, more people on the working for the insectaries that
Mm,
have, a stronger entomology background training. Not that you have to go to school for entomology,
right.
um, but I think if you have a rep that can come in and identify these things for you and work with you is really critical. And I know most of the insectaries are always looking for people with that kind of knowledge level,
Yeah.
to be able to proficient to work with growers. And we also need to fund the research here in the United States, which we're not doing. When I look for where can I learn new information, I have to rely on Canada
Yeah.
and Europe. Um, Canada is being very well funded on biological control. And Europe is, the Netherlands, France, um, they're turning out amazing research over there that helps me light because sure, that's great and all, but how is that gonna help me in Florida? How is it
Right.
gonna help me in Texas?
Yeah.
Because we have our own sets of problems and our own environmental conditions over here. And also, most of these beneficials that are commercially available have been developed for the European market. No one has said like, "Hey, let's develop bugs specifically for the US," kind of thing. And there's no, "Let's look and see what we can find native here in the United States to bring those commercial products." I always feel like we're trying to pound a square peg into a round hole and using products that have, again, really been developed for Europe and see how we can make them fit here in the US.
Yeah.
Um, again, it's a funding of research and also lack of actual insect production or biological production inside the US.
Yeah.
Because realistically, we only have one large insectary here in
Right.
the US. We've got some small little satellite, producing 1 or 2 things here or there.
Yeah.
Um, but really, we don't have mass production, here in the US, and it does not seem for the most part, the insectaries are willing to invest in putting a large insectary here in the US market.
Well, I know like you and I too have talked a lot about in the past about what happens in Europe and, don't necessarily react and think that it can apply here. As you said, you've got to take what's going on there maybe and look for solutions here, but you can't take something that's developed overseas, bring it to the US and expect it to just work right off the bat for anybody.
Yes, it's been I think a really good example of that is with this Thrips parvispinus that has been, a real problem, in Florida, it's in Canada, it's in the Netherlands, it's in France, it's throughout Europe.
Yeah.
Just from a sticky card perspective, because everybody's been looking at sticky cards and finding everybody's getting different results with different colors.
Mhm.
And, we all agree it has something to do with how the light passes through the protective covering of your hoop house, greenhouse, and, the light spectrum has changed and
Yeah.
how it reflects off of cards. But I think it's a really good example of just because it works in France doesn't mean it's gonna work here, even from a sticky card standpoint, and how we have to do a lot of our own trials and work here to figure out what's going to work here, in the United States. And then even in the United States, I mean, my gosh, again, Florida is so different than the Carolinas, which is different from Maine, which is different than Denver. You've got such a, range of humidities, plants, pest complexes, state laws, because, some beneficials we can have in some states we can't have those beneficials depending on, the federal permits from the USDA. So, it's a lot.
Oh, I'm sure. I want to go back to the educational side of things for just a second, and I wonder sometimes if it's a generational thing. And I think that the next generation of greenhouse owners is being more proactive and looking into the benefits of biologicals, but then also using it. Sometimes I think from a marketing standpoint, you can't. If you're listening to this, you can't see it, but the greenhouse behind me here is Fort Meyer and Sons. And I talked to Matt Fortmeyer, and he tells me how they use that as a marketing and recruitment tool where they're going out to find new folks to work and say, we're investing in this technology that it's the next thing that's going to lead the industry forward, but it's also designed to be safer what we're doing. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I definitely see generational differences. I kind of got into the industry at an in-between time between generations because when I got in, there was a lot of older guys in the industry and there was no one like my age getting into it. Now there's people are super interested in plants and there's a younger wave behind me and working with the 2 different groups. The older people are not scared of pesticides. My daddy grew up, spraying DDT, smoking on a tractor, and he lived 110. Yeah, okay. Yeah, he had the right genetics. Um, but the newer generations, definitely that is something I've heard from greenhouses and nurseries are trying to hire. A lot of younger people are not comfortable with pesticides. They don't necessarily wanna spray them, they don't wanna, have exposure to themselves. They are concerned more about the environment, and there's definitely greater interest in using bios, I would say the strongest group advocating for beneficials are young women. Women are they really take to the beneficials, not to say there aren't good guys, don't, send me an
Right.
email about that, but just from my observation, the women really get dialed into the details and really wanna learn more, um, about using them,
Yeah.
uh, and I think that we are seeing a wave, but then also, I mean, I just literally got an email from, uh, someone that attended my session. I spoke this week in Maryland, and it's a young person that had attended my session, and they're like, "Where do I get more education on beneficials? Where do I go to read? Where do I go to learn?" And I'm kind of at, like, you know, a point where I don't know where to send them because there's not really good books. There's not I mean, some of the websites I mean, I will say, Featured Creatures from the University of Florida, if you know the information you're looking for,
Okay.
has some really good information on biology of pests and some of the beneficial options, but they're not gonna tell you how to do a program. I think that we are moving so fast
Mm.
and figuring things out in the field, in the private industry sector that we're not even having time to really write down and document all this stuff because we're just like for me, I'm on to the next problem, on to the
Right.
next problem,
Yeah.
and dealing with it. And the universities, which are critical, and I do work close with like Purdue and Cornell
Yeah.
and University of Florida and things like that, since they're in this, it takes 3 years to publish something, they just can't quite keep up
Right.
with because my job is to fix the problem and get plants sold out the door. And again, the research is critical, but I think they're moving slowly because their job right now is to publish, the publisher perish,
Sure.
and not quick problem solve necessarily.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I think it's tough. So oftentimes by the time the university stuff does come out and here's something in writing, I don't wanna say we in private industry have solved it by any means because parvis spinus, we need a lot more research on that,
Yeah.
but we've band-aided the problem and kind of are on to the next thing. So
Yeah.
there's not great resource material, and I think that's why in-person trainings are important because you can learn what currently the problems are and how we're dealing with them currently,
Yeah.
um, out there. So, yeah, it's a problem. You can get books on biocontrol, which are a broad overview and they talk a lot in concepts.
Yeah.
And growers don't want concepts. They want answers that are affordable that will keep them in business.
The key to optimizing your plant's performance starts with consistent, efficient substrates. Hydrofiber from Profile Growing Solutions is a highly engineered media that helps provide better growing across a wide variety of crops. The fibers easily blend with other mixed components and help to provide optimum airspace and maximum water efficiency so your plants can achieve maximum success. Unlock your growing potential with consistent and efficient hydrofiber. Learn more at profilegrowing.com. You talk about it's an industry that's still evolving too. So, that research has to continue to take place. And, we've talked a lot about too about, you know, universities partnering with suppliers to do some of this because you said the pace differs. The end result may be similar across whichever institution that you're working with, but the pace is going to be different and the end goal is going to be different. So, that's something that really has to continue to happen, I think.
Yeah. But the rate for the ornamental market here in the US, which we have lost entomologists,
Yeah.
is I don't wanna say staggering, but I mean, you had Whitney Cranshaw retire, you had John Sanderson retire, JC Chong went to private industry, Stanton Gill passed away. I mean, Lance Osborne at the University of Florida, I talked to him the other day, he's never allowed to retire or die. I
Mhm.
told him that. Um, and we do have some young up and coming people like Samantha Welding, who just took a position at Cornell to work. Now, she's not solely working on ornamentals, she's going to work in controlled environment agriculture. And so we do have some of these some people coming up, but the knowledge that I don't know if you call it a brain drain that, with losing these people that were the forefathers of biocontrol. I mean, John Sanderson,
Yeah.
has been working on biocontrol research for decades for greenhouse.
Yeah.
And he's retired. And, there goes that knowledge. Um, and so we're kind of, I feel, from a university standpoint, we've lost so much knowledge in the last couple years,
Right.
that it's gonna take us a while for them to catch back up, um, to get all the industry experience. And from the ornamental standpoint, I don't there just aren't many ornamental entomologists working out there, as many as there used to be.
Yeah. Well, and you brought up a good point too there about the emergence of CEA. So that's a whole other industry that you have to account for with the and I know you've got into the cannabis side of things as well. These are two industries that need a lot of attention for this kind of research as well.
Yeah, and the cannabis was a completely unique thing because universities still really have their hands tied. I mean, they can work on air quote "hemp," but, we just for cannabis, working with my growers, we've just had to figure it out, and honestly, pretty much, for the most part, we can manage all the pests now in cannabis. There's no, burn the crop down anymore. Um, we've been able to get that all worked out. Generally between a few of the 25B products and the biocontrol agents, we can manage all the pests in cannabis now.
Right.
And so I don't worry about cannabis so much. Um, CEA, with, all the vegetables,
Right.
I mean, it's it's kind of I mean, Canada's been doing that forever, and pretty much 100% of the Canadian vegetable growers use biocontrol.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the American people just need to go up to Canada and, learn a bit from them.
Yeah.
Even though, again, with when you have vertical farming in Texas, it is different because of temperatures and the, pests that come in. Because 'cause I've actually seen, like, mealybugs in lettuce crops in Texas. You do have some different pests, but, you can learn a lot from the vegetable guys. That's why I always encourage ornamental guys to tour vegetables, vegetables to tour ornamentals, cannabis
Yeah.
guys,
Oh yeah.
go to all these different even though it's not your industry, you can learn a lot from other industries that you can take home.
Hmm. Hmm. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's one other thing I want to touch on was look at where we are today, and that's the grower consumer connection when it comes to education on this. Consumers I think are slowly becoming aware of how growers are using biocontrols in the greenhouse or for whatever crop they're growing. But that's something I think that also can also be improved. Any thoughts on how that can be facilitated better?
So when you say slow, I feel so slow, we're going backwards in a way.
Uh,
Um Because and it's funny, I wanna say I went on a little rant at my presentation this week, but I kinda did,
yeah.
and if you that's one of those push button topics with me
Right.
that I sometimes get a little upset because, you know, I've been working with farms for decades now
Mm.
on biocontrol,
Yeah.
and they still don't market to the end consumer, "This is what we're doing."
Mm.
Us as an industry as a whole still don't market, "This is what we're doing," and we are still considered the bee killers,
Yeah.
the ornamental market, and when you look at the amount of pesticides ornamentals use, or even greenhouse vegetables compared to field ag,
Yeah.
and people aren't protesting field ag. I think we're the low-hanging fruit to protest because our plants are, in retail stores very easily seen. Because I don't see anybody protesting, the use of neonics in, their soy milk.
Right.
Um And I think we have done a very poor job of truly educating the consumer on the changes we have made
Yeah.
and how, we are not these big pesticide users. Um, and even when it comes down to like the slow release sachets, they look like a tea bag. They go into a lot of hanging baskets these days. And that releases predatory mites slowly for about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the conditions, and that will protect the plant for things like broad mite and western flower thrips, and spider mite. Still, a bunch of my growers have to remove those sachets before they go to retail because the retail people don't want to see those.
Yeah.
And I think as an industry, we need to pull together, do some mass marketing that, look at this. This is, we're using this in lieu of using a pesticide, and that about all these changes about beneficial nematodes. And I actually did a talk at TPIE in Fort Lauderdale, I think it was 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
um, for retail garden centers and how they can, get their customers more involved with biological control, because there are a few products now that are beneficials that
Mhm.
I think that the consumers can use easily, and that it's something that the retail garden centers can sell. And but there is education involved,
Right. Yep.
but saying, hey, this is what we use for commercial growing, but now we're making these products available to you.
Right.
Um, to use. And look, we're not these pesticide bee killing people. These are the changes we've made
Sure.
doing those things. And even though it's not macro beneficials, things with legs, um Valent, who everybody knows produces greenhouse chemistries,
Mm.
they are under the same parent company with Mycorrhiza Solutions, and Mycorrhiza Solutions is now going to take Valent microbial products that commercial growers have used for a long time,
Yeah.
Dipel, Natural, and things like that, and they're gonna package them for the homeowner market. So even though it's not like, you know, mites and insects and things like that, it's still kinda considered on that microbial
Yeah.
level, that now the homeowners are gonna have access to these commercial microbial products, which work very well and are very environmentally safe and very friendly on beneficials.
Sure.
So, there is a shift on accessibility to homeowners in these products, which I'm very happy to be seeing, but they still need the education. And I wish our industry would band together to do some kind of marketing campaign through social media for homeowners.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, to your point though, too, I mean, starting with the retail garden center, that's a good place to start because you have such a close connection with the consumer at those types of locations, I think.
you do, but there's typically a pretty high turnover rate
Hmm.
um, with employees, and the the knowledge in a way that you kinda need, they need training. The
Yeah.
garden center people need training on how to answer customers' questions when they come in, um, and in a way that the homeowner can understand, but also the products be effective.
Yeah.
And I think that, again, you get ownership coming to trade shows, but then getting that information disseminated down to, the people that are unloading trucks and stocking your shelves that answer the questions is challenging, because the years I worked for years, at Builder Square in Florida, which it was like Target, I mean, like Home Depot or Lowe's. I don't even think they're in business anymore.
Yeah.
But every I mean, I answered homeowners' questions on what to plant and also pesticide stuff, and that was back in the day of Orthene, Dursban, Diazinon,
Yeah.
where you'd load your cart up with bags of Dursban to broadcaster in your house, but we really didn't get much training, and I think about just, like, the liability of, putting these kids out there telling homeowners how to manage pests with these pesticides that nobody can even use anymore.
Yeah.
Um, so I do think there's a level of training that's important, but I do think, I mean, I go back to this all the time, the how social media was used to get the homeowners wound up about the bee killing incident in Target in the
Hmm.
parking lot.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, many of my growers cannot use neonic pesticides anymore. And that was all done through social media. And you know, it was not exactly accurate, the information that was given. And so I think just social media education on see these sachets, these are a good thing. Hey, we're not using the chemistries of the past. We're using these beneficials. And I do know, like Matt at Fort Myers, they do use that for their employees, but
Mhm.
they sell often to retail, which then the message gets lost. Because it was a couple years ago before COVID, and as my service to our industry, I took every homeowner talk I was asked to do, which, yeah, is I'm always willing to help homeowners when I can, but it's like a whole different level to work
Oh,
with
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
But what I did is the presentations I were giving was talking about like, "Hey, look what we're doing at Metrolina Greenhouses and this, and look what we're doing at Costa Farms and da da da." And everybody's like, "We want to buy from people that are using beneficials. We want to support them. How do we know how to buy these plants?" I'm like, "Well, they're not gonna tell you because nothing's labeled, nothing's tagged. Plants often they'll have genetic branding, but not necessarily who grew the plants. I
Right.
mean, Costa does have tags, but you take my point that they do all this stuff, but the consumers they're not even given the choice. They're given the choice on produce. You
Mhm.
go in, do you want organic? Do you want conventional? It's clear and labeled. In
Yeah.
our industry, you have no idea had 57 pesticide sprays and which ones were grown with beneficials. You don't know.
Right.
And we are not educating the consumers, nor are we marketing to them about how we as an industry have changed and how we've grown. And I mean, because again, I've been in this industry over 30 years. I have seen amazing differences. Like some of the earliest talks I gave in the 90s, if four people came to my talk on biocontrol, I was excited.
Yeah.
Um, and now, a lot of the sessions are standing room only because people do want the information. They they are challenged with, resistance issues. There a few are worried about pollinator issues, but it's definitely a growing area and we just education. I cannot say it enough. We just need a lot more.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to look to this coming year, and perhaps a couple of years beyond that, and kind of look at what are some of the key areas that you're focused on, that you're hearing about, and some of the overall trends that are going to be driving where this market is going to be headed this year and the next couple of years for this market.
Well, I mean, I'm still kind of hyper focused on thrips and thrips
Yeah.
identification because whether, again, it be a chemical program or a biocontrol program, you have to know what species it is because thrips do not all have the same biology. People, are told, yeah, you have thrips. They go online, they Google, and they all end up on the biology of Western flower thrips. And not all thrips not all thrips lay their eggs in plant tissue. Not all thrips pupate in the soil. Some of the thrips are so big and beefy that the beneficial, like the predatory mites, can't take them down. When it comes to chemicals, spinosad will kill some species, but spinosad doesn't kill other species. So really, working to make sure that people know how to identify things, I think is still really big on my list,
Mhm.
because, I mean, if you've got a headache, you go to the doctor and they test to find out exactly what the problem is. You don't start out with, "Well, you got a headache, you got a brain tumor, we're gonna, give you radiation treatment." You
Yeah.
don't. You've got to identify what it is and to understand it. And so I'm really focused on identification,
Yeah.
and still teaching growers and with thrips, you don't have to know everything. You probably need to know if you're a floriculture grower, maybe 5 thrips. And if you know those 5, you'll be okay. And if it's
Mhm.
something else after that, you can ask for help.
Yeah.
Because I don't know every thrip species, and I still have to key stuff out. But knowing the target things. I think that the fastest growing area right now is in automation and applying beneficials. Um, you have um, Beneficial Insectary's been doing a lot with it because their parent company, BioBest, has developed the Entomatic,
Yeah.
which can hook onto tractors, that they're using this more in farm fields outside, but I'm hoping with adaption for nursery pots through fields where you have these long boom arms that go out like 10 feet on each side, and they have tubes that drop predatory mites so that we can move. using beneficials into larger scale area, because this has been, I think, why a lot of beneficial use is still being captured in the greenhouse, not
Mm.
because beneficials work better indoors, because that is not true, but it's because of just sheer size, and greenhouses are smaller typically than outdoor production. But, with developments like the entomatic, um, Colbert has a new blower coming out, which that's again more appropriate for someone that's walking and applying. But it has a rotational dropping device for them to blow to be softer on beneficials.
Yeah.
BioLine has, a product that I know it's been demoed here in the US, but I have not been able to see it yet. They've developed, a system for spraying out Priscillus
Okay.
onto plants, um, and if that's something that could ever be done, that's right now, it just looks like almost like a handheld pump up sprayer kinda thing.
Yeah.
But if that system could ever be put to a larger scale, which I'm sure they're heading that direction for more outdoor ag, um, that would be a huge game changer. The development in drones is happening at lightning speed.
Yeah.
And then also the development from Copert of being able to take like lacewing eggs, mix them in water with xanthan gum, and being able to spray that out. In my mind, for cities that have street trees that have terrible problem with aphids, they could come by and, quickly spray all these lacewing eggs up into the tree. The eggs will hatch in a few days, and now you have the lacewing larva going throughout the tree to feed on the aphids so that they don't have to use insecticides on those street trees and inside of cities.
Yeah.
I this stuff is coming fast, and so the application methods are what I think is gonna be the fastest growing area. Um, when it comes to actual species of beneficials, the USDA is really tight on bringing in new species, as they should be.
Right.
If we did exploration here, we've got some really good beneficials here, and that's what Canada did. Canada funded researchers to actually go look for beneficials that were feeding on their pest problems, and then funded how to rear those beneficials, and then they did a technology transfer to the Canadian insectaries.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to happen here. We need to find our species that are indigenous, figure out how to rear them, and then rear them here so they're adapted for our environment. Um, so that said, we're not gonna get much new, but there are some new life. I'm trying to be vague without being vague, because I know some stuff that I'm not allowed quite yet to talk
Oh,
about,
sure. Yeah.
but there are some new life stages of beneficials we're currently using that are coming available to be able to release. Um, and so, we'll have some new ways to do things here, as well as new insectaries. Bioplanet out of Italy is now going to be coming to the US market. So there'll be a new kid on the block, and they do have some beneficials that other suppliers are not currently supplying. Um, and they bring a different way of doing things. And so each time we get a new company, it kind of opens another door,
Yeah.
not only on new technologies, new products, but also more people out in the field working with growers, because we still, like, as I mentioned before, we need more people proficient at biocontrol out in the field,
Sure.
because I am grateful to have my job and I love this industry and I will die in this industry. But I personally cannot keep getting on a plane every single week and flying somewhere. I love my job. I mean, honestly, I'd do my job for free if I didn't have bills,
Yeah.
but I'm not a spring chicken anymore, and I can only do so much.
Yeah. Well, and just to fill in those who are listening, we were talking before, just the process of trying to line up a discussion like this. I mean, you're on the road constantly, so I appreciate even you taking just an hour or so today to talk through some of this. So, um, last couple of questions as we start to wind down a little bit. First is, What are you most excited? I know we talked about a lot of different things up to this point, but when you look at the future of where this particular segment of the market is headed, what are you most excited about? What are you most looking forward to when it comes to the future of the use of biologicals in the greenhouse and in this market?
I don't know if it's my excited about, but my dream would be, and it may be a weird one, is that growers don't kind of like hold biocontrol to a tougher standards than traditional chemistries,
Mm,
because people will try biocontrol, and if it doesn't work right out of the gate, they're like, "Ah, biocontrol doesn't work." Rah, rah, rah." They'll spray a chemistry, and if it didn't kill the bugs, they'll spray it again, and they'll spray it again, and they'll spray it again. Um, and so there's this higher standard of expectation, like it should work like magic, and that people aren't willing to always put in the time. People are willing more today.
yeah,
We're seeing that where people are willing to come back, because one of the things, and I hate to say this and I feel bad for the growers, one of the things I really enjoy doing is figure out why did a biocontrol program fail? Why? Because if I can do that, then I can help other growers from making that same mistake.
yeah,
And so I find it very interesting that, um, you know, figuring out like this back forensicing of, was there an overspray? And now, because pesticide drift is a huge part. Now, with all the cannabis production and all the pesticide residue testing companies, in addition to the USDA in North Carolina, we can send a leaf in and they can tell us if the pesticide residue is there and, how much is on there to say, was it an overspray? Was it a direct spray? Is it contamination in the water? Those kinds of things. And I get really excited about figuring these things out,
yeah,
because then it can be like, hey, buddy, it was your pesticides. It was not that the biocontrols failed. And I will say again, most of the time when bios fail, number one, pesticide residue. Number two, you're not putting out the right beneficial because you didn't do your due diligence
yeah,
to figure out what your problem really was. But everybody's quick to, blame quality of beneficials and say biocontrol doesn't work. So for the future, I wish people would come into bios with a better understanding of it does take work, but once you get there, it's a cult once you cross that line, and everybody then wants to talk about their beneficials. Once they get it figured out, Matt Fortemeyer, as we'll just keep bringing him up, loves to talk about it because they've been successful, and it was not an easy road to get there. But once you get there, people are like, "Oh my gosh, this works so well. We don't have to shut down for REIs. We can have consumers in the area when we're applying beneficials." Um, but also, I'm really, for the future, leery, but wanna be hopeful for the AI technologies.
right.
We are definitely not there yet. I keep testing using AI to identify insects. It is not there yet. I even will go in to like ChatGPT and be like, "Hey, how do you control broad mite?" And it is
Oh boy.
not yeah,
Yeah.
no, because it it gets its information from the internet, and there's so much bad information on pest management on the internet these days. I don't wanna blame the cannabis industry, but they are definitely part of that problem,
Right.
because there's so many bad cannabis recommendations, but I'm hopeful that as AI gets smarter, we'll be able to use it, and as cameras get better on your phones, you'll be able to take a better picture of a thrips, have AI be able to identify it, and actually pull up the right information on how to manage it. So then I can stay home with my husband making candy and just photographing insects, at least 1 week a month. Um, so I'm really hoping that this AI technology does pan out. My concern is overall in the world, um, we're not that big of an industry in a way. If you zoom to the floriculture side, big ag is much bigger, and those tools will come for them first. But I don't know if the money is going to be put into developing those tools, because we are a specialty crop, and that's
Yeah.
where we're going to need funding, like IR4 for getting pesticides registered for the floriculture industry. We're
Right.
going to need money to get this technology transfer to the smaller industries. And I just don't know if that's going to happen or not.
Yeah. You just kind of alluded to the last question I was going to ask. People know you as the bug lady. They talk to you at conferences. They talk to you at workshops. You go visit growers at their greenhouses. When you're not doing all that, and I know your free time is very limited nowadays, but what do you do when you're not, taking pictures of bugs and visiting growers and doing all that?
Well, sleep. Um, I've actually, as I mentioned before, in the last 4 weeks, I've done 7 different events,
Yeah,
and when I come home, I have been sleeping 12 hours a night.
I can
Uh,
imagine.
because I'm exhausted. But and some of the industry know about this, and some have been recipients. Um, I have a hobby of historic reenacting for candy making from the 1800s.
Yeah,
And I restore candy machines that were made in Philadelphia from about 1860 to the early 1900s. I collect them, I restore them, and then I actually make candy on them. And I also collect old candy receipts from the 1800s, understanding what candy was being sold, what the pricing was, and also, old candy magazines from the 1800s to get recipes to make different things.
yeah.
I used to have way more time for it, but my time is, as you said, very limited these days.
Yeah.
So I try to, make things when I can. And, anybody that comes to the Mance show, if they swing by my husband's booth, because he's fertile, he does the biodegradable pots. We always have bags of candy in the booth for people that come by. So next year at the
Oh, I
Mint
was a
Show,
I was a recipient this year. Yeah.
yeah, if you come by the booth, there's always candy being handed out. But I also have a really strong affinity for mice. And I have some rescue mice that I've fed little pinky mice to get them to adults. And I don't understand why people don't like mice. They're smart, they're adorable. And so I love mice. I have 7 cats, so yeah.
Oh, I know our industry definitely appreciates all the work that and the time and the work that you spend, helping growers learn more, helping the industry learn more. So I'm glad that we had a chance to catch up today. And, for those folks who know you already, just kind of know what you're working on next. And for those who don't, just kind of knowing more about, the passion that you have for this side of the industry and why it needs to be a huge part of what we are as an industry moving forward.
Yeah, and I think it will be, because as we know, consumers drive the market, and in this situation, the growers are the consumers, and they do want more. They want new species, but right now, the loss of research entomologists and funding, is gonna be the challenge, of having and the market will continue to grow on its own just because more growers are using bios for things like western flower thrips and fungus gnats, but we need to be looking at more on flea beetles, scale insects, things that we currently don't have solutions for, and figuring out how we can have solutions for them within the biocontrol arena. And again, it takes a researcher and it takes money, and we're just limited on those ends here in the U.S.
Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.